The Wolf of the Steppe, the Epic of Subutai. Chapter 1, The Silence of the Taiga. The world was not made of grass, not yet. For the boy, the world was made of shadows, pine needles, and the biting cold that lived inside the bones. He was born to the Uriankai, the forest people, the ones who did not ride horses across the open plains but stalked through the dense Siberian taiga on skis made of birch wood. Here, the sun was a distant visitor, filtering through the canopy of ancient trees in thin, pale beams that offered light but little warmth. The boy's name was Subutai. He was small for his age, with eyes that were dark and unblinkingly still. That eye in the forest, stillness was not a choice, it was the price of survival. If you moved too fast, you broke a twig. If you broke a twig, the deer fled. If the deer fled, the family starved. Silence was the religion of Ophi's people, and Subutai was its most devout monk. His father, Jarkagudai, was a blacksmith. This was a trade of magic and fire. In a land of ice, the blacksmith controlled the heat. Subutai would sit for hours in the small, smoky hut, watching his father work. He watched the bellows pump, sounding like the lungs of a dying beast. He watched the iron turn from black to red, from red to white. He saw how the metal, when it was hot, was soft and yielding, but when it was cooled, it became harder than stone. "Look closely, Subutai," his father would say, his voice rough like grinding stones. "Iron has a memory that if you hit it wrong, it remembers the weakness. If you fold it right, it remembers the strength. Men are the same. Pain folds us. Cold tempers us. Do not hate the cold, my son. The cold is what makes the iron strong." Subutai did not hate the cold. He respected it. He learned to read the forest like a book written in snow. That he knew that when the wolves howled from the northern ridge, a storm was coming within 2 days. That he knew that if the ravens were flying low and silent, there was a carcass nearby. He learned that nature was not cruel, it was simply indifferent. It had rules. If you followed the rules, you lived. If you broke them, you died. This logical, ruthless clarity would one day become the foundation of his mind. One evening, deep in the winter of 1189, a stranger arrived at their camp. It was his older brother, Jelm. Jelm had left years ago to join the service of a minor chieftain named Temujin on the distant steppe. Jelm looked different now. He wore furs that smelled of horse sweat and open wind, not the pine resin scent of the forest people. He carried a curved saber at his hip, and his eyes were constantly scanning the horizon, even though there was no horizon here, only trees. They sat around the fire that night. The flames cast long, dancing shadows on the walls of the yurt. Jelm spoke of a world that Subutai could barely imagine. "The steppe is not like the forest, little brother," Jelm said, tearing a piece of dried meat with his teeth. "Here, the trees protect you. You can hide behind a trunk. You can climb. But on the steppe, there is nothing. The sky touches the grass in every direction. There is no place to hide. If an enemy comes, you must see him before he sees you. Or you must ride faster than the wind." Temujin, their father asked, staring into the fire. "Is he the one? The one the shamans speak of?" Jelm nodded, his face serious. He is different, father. He does not fight for gold. He does not fight for women. He fights to unite the felt-walled tents. He says that the Mongols are like a bundle of arrows. One arrow can be broken easily. But a bundle cannot be broken. He calls himself a gherkin, a ruler of all. But his enemies call him a madman. We are outnumbered. The Merkits, the Tatars, the Karates, they are all hunting us. We sleep with our swords in our hands. We eat while riding. But I tell you this, when he looks at you, you feel that you would die for him. Subutai listened. He was 14 years old. He had never ridden a horse. He had never seen a city. But as he listened to his brother, he felt a strange sensation in his chest. It was not excitement, it was a clicking sound. Like a key turning in a lock. The forest was safe. He could become a blacksmith like his father. He could live a long life, forging arrowheads and knives, hunting reindeer, and dying in his sleep. It was a good life. But it was a small life. The iron in his soul was cold, it needed the fire. I will go with you, Subutai whispered. The hut went silent. His father looked up. Jelm laughed softly. You are a child of the trees, Subutai. You do not know how to ride. You do not know the sword. The steppe will eat you alive. The wind there skins the face of a man. The sun blinds him. Iron does not care about the wind, Subutai said, repeating his father's lesson. And I can learn to ride, but I cannot learn to be vast in this forest. The trees, they are too close. I cannot see. His father stood up slowly. He walked to the corner of the hut and picked up a heavy object wrapped in oilcloth. He unwrapped it to reveal a small dagger. It was not a weapon of war, it was a tool. A blacksmith's knife. Simple. Unadorned. But perfectly balanced. You have the mind of a smith, Subutai, his father said, handing him the blade. You look at things and you see how they are made. You see the structure. War is not just about swinging a sword. War is a structure. It has weight. It has balance. If you go to the steppe, do not try to be a hero. Heroes die young. Be a smith. Look for the cracks in the enemy. And when you find them, strike. The next morning, before the sun had fully risen, Subutai packed his meager belongings. A fur coat, his father's knife, and a bag of dried berries. He stepped out of the yurt. The cold air hit him, but he did not shiver. He looked at the tall pines one last time. He memorized the pattern of the bark, the sound of the wind in the needles. He was saying goodbye to the silence of the taiga. He climbed onto the back of a spare packhorse that Jelm had brought. It felt unstable, like sitting on a moving log. He gripped the mane tightly. Jelm smiled and kicked his own horse forward. Do not fall, brother, Jelm shouted over his shoulder. The Khan does not like men who fall. They rode south. For days, the trees grew thinner. The air grew warmer. The ground changed from soft pine needles to hard, dry earth. And then, finally, the trees stopped. Subutai pulled on the reins and stopped his horse. He gasped. Before him lay the infinite. The great steppe. It was an ocean of green and gold, rolling endlessly under a sky so blue it hurt his eyes. There were no walls. No ceiling. It was terrifying. It was magnificent. He felt exposed, like a bug on a flat stone. But he also felt an immense, crushing sense of possibility. Somewhere out there, in that vast emptiness, was a man named Temujin. And somewhere out there was the destiny that was waiting to be forged. Subutai kicked his horse. He did not look back at the forest. The wolf of the steppe had entered his hunting ground. Chapter 2: The Camp of the Outcast. The steppe was a cruel teacher. For 7 days, they rode south, and for 7 days, Subutai learned the meaning of pain. The saddle was not a seat, it was a torture device designed to strip the skin from the inside of his thighs. The sun was not a lamp, it was a hammer that beat down upon his head until his vision blurred. In the forest, the ground was soft with moss and needles. Here, the earth was hard, baked by the summer heat into a cracked mosaic of yellow and brown. Dust coated his throat, his eyes, his very soul. He wanted to stop. He wanted to lie down in the shade of a rock and sleep for a week. But Jelm did not stop. Jelm rode with the ease of a man sitting in a chair, his body moving in perfect rhythm with the horse. Subutai bit his lip until it bled, forcing himself to stay upright. Iron, he told himself, that I am iron being hammered. Do not break. On the evening of the 8th day, they smelled it before they saw it. The scent of wood smoke, boiled mutton, and the sharp, ammonia tang of thousands of horses. Look, Jelm said, pointing his whip toward a bend in the Onan River. There, sprawled across the riverbank like a sleeping beast, lay the camp of Temujin. It was not the glorious city of white tents Subutai had imagined in his dreams. It was a scar on the landscape. The yurts were blackened by smoke, patched with rough animal hides. Men sat by fires sharpening rusted blades. Dogs fought over scraps of bone. It looked desperate. It looked hungry. This is it? Subutai asked, his voice cracking from thirst. This is the army that will conquer the world. Jelm smiled, a wolfish grin. Do not look at the tents, brother. Look at the men. Subutai looked. He saw men of every tribe, Merkits, Tatars, Karaits, Mongols. Men who should have been killing each other. But here, they sat together. They did not move with the lazy slouch of villagers, they moved with the coiled tension of predators. They walked with a purpose. There was no laughter in this camp, only a low, constant hum of preparation. It was the hum of a hive before the swarm. As they rode through the perimeter, heads turned. Eyes assessed them. When they saw Jelm, they nodded with respect. Jelm was a noker, a close companion of the Khan. He was aristocracy in this meritocracy of wolves. But when they looked at Subutai, a small, dusty boy clinging to his horse like he a sack of grain, they smirked. Fresh meat, a scar-faced warrior muttered as they passed. The wolves will eat well this winter. They dismounted near the center of the camp, before a large white yurt. It was simple, unadorned, but it stood apart from the others, radiating a silent authority. A standard made of 9 white yak tails fluttered in the wind on a pole outside. The 9 tails represented the spirits of the land and sky. "Wait here," Jelm commanded. "Do not speak unless spoken to. Do not look him in the eye for too long. And for the sky god's sake, do not trip." Jelm entered the tent. Subutai stood alone outside. His legs were trembling, not just from the ride, but from the crushing weight of where he was. He was standing at the epicenter of the storm. Minutes passed. They felt like hours. Then, the flap of the yurt opened. Jelm stepped out and beckoned him inside. Subutai took a breath, tasted the dust and the smoke, and stepped across the threshold. The interior was dim, lit by a central fire pit. The air was thick with the smell of incense and grease. At the back of the tent, sitting on a pile of wolf furs, was a man. Temujin. He was not a giant, as the story said. He was a man of average height, with broad shoulders and hands that looked large and capable of crushing stone. His hair was reddish-brown, and his beard was sparse, but it was his eyes that froze Subutai's blood. They were green, cat-like, piercing, and utterly devoid of fear. They were eyes that had seen the bottom of the abyss and climbed back out. Temujin was cleaning an arrow with a rag. He did not look up immediately. He let the silence stretch, testing the boy, weighing his presence. "Jelm tells me he brought a gift," Temujin said finally. His voice was quiet, raspy, like dry grass rubbing together. "But I see a boy who can barely stand." Subutai tried to bow, but his legs were so stiff he almost fell. He caught himself, wincing. "I am Subutai, son of Jarkagudai the smith." Temujin looked up. The green eyes locked onto him. "A smith. We need smiths. We need arrowheads. Can you forge steel?" "I can," Subutai said. "But I did not come to make horseshoes, Great Khan." Temujin raised an eyebrow. The men sitting around the edges of the tent, generals like Boarshu and Macaulay, shifted. It was dangerous to speak so boldly. "Oh." Temujin put down the arrow. "Then why are you here? You ride like a sack of potatoes. You have no muscle on your arms. You smell of pine trees, not blood. What use are you to me?" Subutai felt the panic rising. He was failing. He was being rejected. He thought of his father's words, "Look for the structure. Look for the cracks." He looked around the tent. He saw the generals. Strong men. Swords. Spears. The iron of the army. Temujin had enough iron. What did he lack? Subutai looked at the tent itself. The wind was howling outside, battering the felt walls. A small draft was coming through a gap in the doorway, making the fire flicker. "You have many swords, Great Khan," Subutai said, his voice finding a strange steadiness. "You have many wolves who can bite. You do not need another wolf." "Not yet." Temujin leaned forward, intrigued. "Go on." "A tent has strong poles," Subutai said, gesturing to the generals. "But the poles alone cannot keep out the wind. If the wind gets inside, the fire dies. You need the felt. You need the lining that covers the gaps. The lining that catches the rain before it hits the skin. The lining that is never seen, but without it, the structure fails. Subutai dropped to one knee, ignoring the pain in his thighs. He lowered his head until it touched the woolen rug. I will be that lining, great Khan. I will be the felt that protects your tent from the wind. I will be the layer that protects you from the rain. I will watch the cracks that others ignore. I will listen to the whispers that the swords are too loud to hear. Silence filled the tent. The fire crackled. Jelm held his breath. Temujin stared at the top of the boy's head. He had expected a plea for glory. He had expected a boast that he had not expected philosophy from a forest child. The felt. Temujin whispered. He looked at the drafty door. He looked at his generals. They were brave, yes. But they were blunt instruments. This boy offered something else. Intelligence. Stand up, Subutai, Temujin commanded. Subutai rose, swaying slightly. Temujin stood up and walked over to him. He was shorter than Subutai expected, but his presence filled the room. He reached out and squeezed Subutai's shoulder. The grip was iron hard. My tent has many cracks, Temujin said softly, only for Subutai to hear. The tribes hate us. The empires to the south laugh at us. Assassins walk in the shadows. I do not need more killers right now. I need eyes. I need a mind. He turned to the rest of the tent. This boy is no longer a guest. He is of my household. He will stand at my door. No one enters without him knowing. No one leaves without him seeing. He will learn the names of every man in this camp. He will learn the speed of every horse. Temujin looked back at Subutai. You want to be the felt? Then start by stopping the wind. Guard my door. Listen to everything. Forget nothing. If I die in my sleep because you missed a whisper, I will chase your spirit across the afterlife and kill you again. I will not miss a whisper, Subutai promised. Good. Temujin waved his hand. Now, go eat. You look like a starved rat. And Jelm. Yes, my Khan. Teach him to ride properly. It hurts my eyes to watch him. Subutai stumbled out of the tent into the cold night air. He collapsed onto the dirt, his legs finally giving out. He looked up at the vast, starry sky of the steppe. The Milky Way stretched across the heavens like a river of silver. He was alive. He was in. He was the doorkeeper. The lowest rank. But he was placed exactly where he wanted to be, watching the center of the world. He closed his eyes and smiled. The forging had begun. Chapter 3, The University of War. 3 winters came and went. On the steppe, winter is not a season, it is a siege. The wind screams down from Siberia, carrying ice shards that can blind a man. The herds freeze standing up. The milk turns to stone in the buckets. Weak men die. Weak tribes vanish. But inside the camp of Temujin, the fire burned hot. Subutai was no longer the clumsy boy who had fallen off his horse. He was 17 now. He had grown taller, though he was still stocky and broad-chested, built like a mountain pony rather than Eris horse. He stood at the entrance of the Khan's great yurt, wrapped in heavy furs, a curved saber now hanging at his hip. He had kept his promise. He was the felt lining. He was the shadow. For 3 years, he had stood at that post. 12 hours a day. He became invisible. The generals, fierce men like Boarshu, Macaulay, and his own brother Jelm, stopped seeing him. To them, he was just a piece of furniture, a fixture of the door. They argued, plotted, and shouted in front of him as if he were made of wood. They did not know that the piece of wood was absorbing everything. Subutai learned the names of every centurion. He learned how much grain a horse needed to march for 3 days. He learned that the Carates fought with lances, while the Merkits preferred bows. He learned that anger makes a commander stupid, and that patience makes a commander dangerous. He built a library in his mind. While other young warriors were drinking kumis and wrestling by the fire, Subutai was standing in the cold, closing his eyes, and replaying the conversations of the day. He was building a model of the world, gear by gear, strut by strut. One evening, deep in the frozen month of January 1192, a crisis arrived. The Khan's yurt was crowded. The air was thick with tension and the smell of wet wool. A scout had arrived, frostbitten and exhausted, collapsing at Subutai's feet before being dragged inside. Subutai stood at his post, his back to the felt wall, listening. "The Tatars," the scout gasped. "They have crossed the river. They are raiding the northern pastures. They took 2,000 horses." A roar of rage went up in the tent. The Tatars were the ancient enemies. They were the ones who had poisoned Temujin's father long ago. There was blood debt here. "We ride tonight," shouted Belgudii, the Khan's half-brother. "We catch them before they reach the mountains. We slaughter them all." "No," came the voice of Boarshu. "The snow is too deep. Our horses are weak from the winter. If we ride hard, half the mounts will die before we even see the enemy. That is what they want. They want to draw us out. So we let them steal our herds." Jelm argued, slamming his fist on a table. "If we show weakness, the other tribes will circle us like vultures. We must strike." The argument raged. Attack or wait? Pride or prudence? It was the eternal dilemma of the steppe. Temujin sat in silence, drinking from a silver cup. He watched his generals argue. He saw the fire in their eyes, but he also saw the trap. Finally, he looked up. His gaze drifted past the shouting men, past the fire, to the shadow standing by the door. "Subutai," Temujin said softly. The room did not go quiet immediately. The generals were still shouting. "Subutai." Temujin barked. Silence fell like a hammer. The generals turned, confused, looking at the doorkeeper. Subutai stepped forward. He did not bow frantically as he had done 3 years ago. He moved with a quiet economy of motion. He stopped 3 paces from the fire. You have been listening, Temujin said. You always listen. Tell me, what does the blacksmith's son see that the warriors do not? Subutai felt the weight of the stairs. Jelm looked nervous. This was a test. A wrong word could mean a whipping, or worse. Subutai looked at the map drawn on a piece of cured deer skin spread out on the floor. He looked at the markings of the river and the mountains. The Tatars are not stealing horses, Subutai said. His voice was calm, deeper than it used to be. They are stealing time. Explain, Temujin commanded. They took 2,000 horses, Subutai continued, pointing at the map. But they are moving north, towards the defile of Chekshare. The snow there is chest deep. Driving 2,000 frightened horses through that snow takes energy. They are moving slow. Exactly. Belgudii shouted. So we can catch them. If we chase them, Subutai said, turning to look the prince in the eye, we must break the trail. Our horses will be exhausted pushing through the snow. By the time we reach them, their horses will burst, and ours will be spent. They will wait for us at the top of the pass. They will shoot down. We will die. So we do nothing. Bo-Orshu asked, crossing his arms. No, Subutai said. We do not chase the tail of the wolf. We cut the throat. He knelt by the map. He picked up a piece of charcoal. The Tatars are moving here, he drew a line. But their wives and their wagons are here, at the Beer Lake winter camp. They sent their best warriors to raid us, thinking we would chase the bait. Subutai looked up at Temujin. We do not go north. We go east. The wind has blown the snow off the eastern plains. The ground issued. We can ride fast. We bypass the raiding party completely. We burn their winter camp. We take their food. We capture their families. He stood up. When the Tatar warriors reach the mountains with our stolen horses, they will look back and see the smoke of their own homes. They will panic. They will turn around. They will run their horses to death trying to get back. And when they arrive, exhausted and broken, we will be waiting for them. Not in the deep snow, but in their own camp. Warm. Federal. And ready. The silence in the tent was absolute. The generals looked at the map. They traced the lines in their minds. It was brutal. It was unheroic. It avoided the direct fight. But it was perfect. It was the logic of the blacksmith. Don't hit the iron where it is thick. Hit it where it connects. Temujin looked at the map. A slow smile spread across his face. It was the smile of a man who had found a weapon he didn't know he had. The tail and the throat, Temujin murmured. He looked at Subutai. You would let them keep our horses for a week. I would let them carry the burden of the horses for a week, my Khan, Subutai replied. Then I would take back the horses, and their heads as interest. Temujin stood up. He kicked the map. Bo-Orshu. Prepare the army. We ride east. He walked over to Subutai. He did not squeeze his shoulder this time. He looked him in the eye, warrior to warrior. You are done with the door, Subutai. My Khan. A dog watches the door, Temujin said. A wolf hunts. You will ride with Jeeb. He is wild. He is fast, but he is reckless. You will be his anchor. You will watch his back. And you will learn how to kill. Subutai nodded. I will be the felt lining, Khan. No, Temujin said, his voice low. You are no longer the felt. The felt is soft. Today, you became the steel. That night, Subutai packed his things. He sharpened his father's knife. He checked the girth of his saddle. The army was moving. The thundering of hooves began to shake the frozen ground. As he mounted his horse, Jelm rode up beside him. Jelm looked at his younger brother, shaking his head in disbelief. Where did you learn that? Jelm asked. The map. The eastern route. Subutai looked at the dark horizon. I learned it from the wolves, brother, Subutai said. They never chase the deer that is running away, they wait where the deer wants to go. He kicked his horse. The doorkeeper was gone. The strategist was born. And the Tatars had no idea that the shadow was coming for them. Chapter 4, The First Blood. The transition from the mind to the sword is violent. For 3 days, the army rode east. They moved not as a parade, but as a phantom. The hooves of the horses were wrapped in leather to muffle the sound on the frozen earth. No fires were lit at night. They ate dried curd and raw meat, chewed slowly in the saddle. Subutai rode on the left flank of the vanguard. Beside him rode Jeeb. Jeeb was everything Subutai was not. He was called the Arrow for a reason. He was lean, wiry, and possessed a terrifying, electric energy. He laughed constantly, at the cold, at the hunger, at the prospect of death. He had once been an enemy who shot Temujin's horse out from under him. Now, he was the Khan's sharpest weapon. You are too stiff, little blacksmith. Jeeb shouted over the wind, grinning through a beard caked with frost. You ride like you are carrying a bowl of soup you are afraid to spill. Relax. The horse knows what to do. You just have to tell it who to kill. I am saving the horse's energy, Subutai replied, his eyes scanning the horizon. Jeeb laughed, a sound like cracking ice. Energy. We are Mongols. We run until we die, and then wearin' in the sky. Stop thinking, boy. Thinking makes you slow. In battle, if you think, you are meat. Subutai did not answer. He disagreed. Thinking is what keeps you from becoming meat, he thought. Both kept his mouth shut. Jeeb was the master here, Subutai was the apprentice. On the dawn of the 4th day, they crested a ridge and looked down. There it was. The Tatar winter camp. It was exactly as Subutai had predicted. The smoke of cooking fires rose lazily into the gray sky. Children were playing near the wagons. The herds were small, just the milk mares and the sick animals. The warriors were gone, lured away to the north by the Konstakoy. It looked peaceful. It looked like home. And they were about to destroy it. Subutai felt a cold knot in his stomach. It wasn't fear, exactly. It was a heaviness. He was about to extinguish these fires. "Look at them," Jeeb whispered, his eyes shining. "Fat. Sleepy. They think they are safe." He drew his saber. It made a sharp hiss against the scabbard. "Let's wake them up." Jeeb raised his bow. He didn't wait for a signal. He let out a high, piercing howl, the sound of a wolf that has found the throat. Hurrah! The vanguard surged forward. Gravity took them. The horses accelerated down the slope, their hooves kicking up clouds of snow. The silence of the morning was shattered. Subutai drew his saber. His hand was shaking slightly, gripped the iron. He told himself, "Remember the forge. This is just work." They hit the camp like a landslide. Chaos. Absolute, deafening chaos. Yurts were slashed open. Men stumbled out, half naked, reaching for weapons that weren't there. The air filled with the screams of women, the barking of dogs, and the sickening thud of steel hitting bone. Subutai found himself in the middle of a swirling dust cloud. A Tatar man, old but strong, lunged at him with a spear. Time seemed to slow down. Subutai saw the spear tip coming. He didn't panic. He saw the angle. He saw the structure of the attack. The man was overextended. His weight was too far forward. The iron is weak on the left, Subutai thought. He didn't block the spear, he guided his horse slightly to the right. The spear passed harmlessly through the air. In the same motion, Subutai swung his saber. He didn't swing with anger. He swung with the mechanics of a hammer hitting an anvil. The blade connected with the man's neck. There was no resistance. The man fell. Subutai didn't look back. He kept moving, keep the flow, he told himself, like water around a rock. Ahead of him, Jeeb was laughing. He was fighting 3 men at once, his horse dancing, his sword a blur of motion. He was enjoying it. He was a demon of war. But Subutai saw something Jeeb didn't. From behind a wagon, a Tatar archer was taking aim. He was aiming at Jeeb's exposed back. Jeeb was too busy laughing to notice. Subutai didn't shout. Shouting takes time. He spurred his horse. He drove his mount hard, crashing through a drying rack of meat, scattering debris. He reached the archer just as the man released the string. Subutai threw his body forward, slamming into the archer with the chest of his horse. The impact was bone-shattering. The arrow flew wide, missing Jeeb by inches. The archer fell, gasping for air. Subutai leaned down and finished him with a single, efficient thrust. Jeeb turned around, wiping blood from his face. He looked at the dead archer. He looked at the arrow stuck in the ground near his horse's hoof. He looked at Subutai. The laughter stopped for a second. "You missed one," Jeeb said, pointing to the left. Subutai turned. Another enemy was coming. He parried, struck, and moved on. The battle lasted less than an hour. When the sun fully rose, the camp was silent. The snow was no longer white, it was a slush of red and brown. The Tatar warriors who had stayed behind were dead, the women and children were being rounded up. The plunder was being stacked. Subutai sat on his horse, breathing heavily. His arm ached. His saber was notched. There was blood on his coat, some of it his, most of it not. He looked at the devastation. He felt a strange hollowness. Was this glory? It smelled like burnt hair and copper. Jeeb rode up beside him. He was cleaning his blade with a piece of silk he had taken from a yurt. "You did well, little blacksmith," Jeeb said. His voice was quieter now. "You ride like an old woman, but you hit like a hammer." "I saw the archer," Subutai said, his voice raspy. "I know," Jeeb said. He sheathed his sword. "You watched my back. That is good. A wolf who hunts alone dies. A wolf who watches the pack lives." Jeeb reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a skin of kumis, fermented mare's milk. He drank deeply, then wiped his mouth and handed it to Subutai. It was an offering. A ritual. "Drink," Jeeb commanded. "Wash the taste of death from your mouth. Today, you are blooded. Today, you are no longer a boy." Subutai took the skin. The sour milk tasted like life. He drank. He looked at his hands. They were stained dark. He realized then that he did not love war. Jeeb loved war. To Jeeb, this was a game. To Subutai, this was a necessary, messy engineering project. And he was very, very good at it. "The main Tatar army will be returning soon," Subutai said, handing the skin back. "They will see the smoke. They will be tired. They will be angry." Jeeb grinned again, the demon returning to his eyes. "Yes. And we will be waiting. Now, get off your horse, boy. Help me stack the bodies. We need to build a wall." Subutai dismounted. His legs were steady this time. He walked into the smoke. The first blood was spilled. The iron was hot. Now, the hammering would truly begin. Chapter 5: The Smoke and the Sorrow. The sun began to dip towards the western horizon, turning the snow-covered steppe into a sheet of blinding copper. The air grew colder, biting at the exposed skin of the waiting men. The Mongol ambush was not hidden behind rocks or in a ravine. It was hidden in plain sight, inside the very camp they had just destroyed. Subutai stood behind an overturned wagon. He had ordered the men to arrange the carts and the debris into a crescent shape, U, facing the direction of the returning Tatar army. It was a simple corral, usually used for sheep. Today, it would be used for men. "They are coming," Jeeb said. He was restringing his bow, testing the tension. He didn't look anxious, that he looked hungry. Subutai peered through a gap in the wood. Far to the north, a dark smudge had appeared on the white horizon. It was moving slowly. Too slowly. "Look at them," Subutai whispered. "The horses are stumbling." The Tatar army was returning. They had ridden north to chase the decoys, realized the trick, and then ridden back in a panic. Their horses had traveled double the distance in deep snow. Their flanks were heaving, their heads low. The riders were frozen, stiff, and exhausted. But worse than the exhaustion was the sight that greeted them. As the Tatars crested the final ridge, they saw it. Their home. The yurts were smoldering ruins. The black smoke rose in a lazy column, marking the grave of their sanctuary. A sound drifted across the plain. It was not a war cry. It was a collective wail of anguish. A sound of pure heartbreak. "They are broken," Jeeb said, grinning. "No," Subutai corrected him, his eyes narrowing. "They are angry. Grief makes a man reckless. Anger makes him blind. They will not form a line. They will charge. They will want to tear us apart with their bare hands." Subutai turned to the men crouched behind the wagons. "Hold," he commanded, his voice steady. "Do not shoot until you see the steam of their breath. Let their anger bring them to us." The Tatars did exactly as Subutai predicted. Seeing the Mongols standing amidst the ruins of their homes, they lost all discipline. The chieftain screamed a command, and with soot. He didn't smile. He didn't cheer. He just nodded. The death of the chieftain broke the spirit of the remaining Tatars. They dropped their weapons. They fell to their knees, weeping in the snow. The battle was over. The sun had set, and the only light came from the dying fires of the camp. Jeeb walked over to Subutai. He placed a heavy hand on his shoulder. He wasn't laughing anymore. "I thought you were a smith," Jeeb said, his voice full of a new kind of respect. "But today, you were a ghost. You killed him with a house, Subutai. You killed him with a house." "I used what was there," Subutai said simply. "Iron. Wood. Fire. It is all the same." That night, a rider was sent to Genghis Khan. The message was short: the Tatars are broken. The east is secure. But Jeeb added a private message to the Khan. He told him that the felt lining had become a wall-off stone. Subutai sat by the fire, sharpening his notched blade. He looked at the stars. He knew that this was just the beginning. He had learned how to destroy a camp. Soon, he would have to learn how to destroy nations. The wolf of the steppe was growing hungry. Chapter 6: The Iron General. Years turned into decades. The boy who had stumbled into the camp smelling of pine needles was gone. In his place stood a man of iron. It was the year 1211. The steppe was silent, for there was no one left to fight. The Merkits, the Tatars, the Naimans, the Karaits, all had been broken, melted down, and forged into a single blade. Temujin was no longer just a chieftain. He was Genghis Khan, the ocean ruler, emperor of all men under the sky. And Subutai was one of his 4 dogs of war. He sat on a hill overlooking the assembly of the great Kurultai. He was 35 years old now. His shoulders were thick with muscle, his face weathered by 1,000 storms. He wore the armor of a general of the Keshig, the imperial guard. Black lacquered leather, trimmed with wolf fur. But his eyes were the same. Dark. Still. Watching. The steppe is too small for us, Subutai, a voice said. Subutai didn't turn. He knew the step of the Khan. Genghis stood beside him, looking south. South, where the sky turned a hazy yellow from the dust of civilization. The Golden Empire, Subutai said. The Jin dynasty. They have 50 million people, Genghis said, spitting on the ground. They have walls of stone that stretch for 1,000 miles. They have armies of peasant infantry so vast they drink rivers dry. They call us savages. They say we smell of horse dung. Stone walls do not move, Subutai said quietly. Armies of peasants do not think. They are heavy, they are slow. Genghis nodded. Jeeb wants to attack the front gate. He wants to burn their cities. But you are looking at the mountains. Subutai pointed to the jagged peaks of the Taihang Mountains that bordered the Jin lands. The Jin rely on the Great Wall, Subutai explained. They sit behind it like a turtle in a shell. If we hit the shell, we break our hands. But a turtle must breathe. It has a neck. The Fox Pass, Genghis murmured. Yehuling. The terrain is terrible, Subutai admitted. Steep ravines. Narrow paths. No water. They believe Normi can cross it in force. That is why we must go there. Lead the way, my iron general, Genghis commanded. Show them that walls are only for those who are afraid. The campaign against the Jin was a descent into a new kind of hell. The Mongols were used to open plains, where they could maneuver and shoot. But northern China was a land of jagged mountains and fortified passes. The Jin army was massive. 300,000 men waited at the Yehuling Pass. They blocked the valleys with walls of shields and forests of spears. They had archers stationed on the cliffs. They were confident. They outnumbered the Mongols 3-1. Genghis Khan led the main force against the center. He pushed hard, creating a chaotic, bloody stalemate in the valley floor. The air filled with the roar of battle, the clash of steel, and the screams of fleeing horses. But Subutai was not in the center. He had taken a detachment of his best riders, men who had ridden with him since the Tatar campaigns, and vanished into the high mountains. For 2 days, they climbed. This was not a march, it was a feat of mountaineering. They led their horses along goat paths barely a foot wide. Below them, a drop of 1,000 feet waited to swallow any mistake. Men slipped and fell silently into the void. Horses panicked and had to be blindfolded. Subutai walked at the front, leading his horse by the bridle. His boots were shredded by the sharp rocks. His lungs burned in the thin air. But he did not stop. He was the felt lining, once again, finding the invisible crack in the structure. On the morning of the third day, they reached the summit overlooking the Jin rear guard. Subutai looked down. Far below, the Jin supply camp was spread out. It was unguarded. The Jin generals were so focused on Genghis Khan in the front that they had forgotten to look up. "They look like ants," his lieutenant whispered. "Ants bite," Subutai said, mounting his horse. "But today, we are the boot." He drew his saber. He didn't scream. He simply pointed down. The descent was a controlled avalanche. The Mongols rode down the steep slope, sliding, skidding, their horses virtually sitting on their haunches to slow down. To the Jin soldiers below, it looked like the mountain itself was attacking. They hit the Jin rear with the force of a thunderbolt. Panic is a contagion. When the Jin soldiers in the rear saw the Mongols appearing from the impossible mountains, they screamed, "They are behind us. We are surrounded." The scream traveled forward, from rank to rank, faster than any messenger. The massive Jin army, 300,000 strong, began to waver. They were pressed from the front by Genghis and from the rear by Subutai. The turtle began to suffocate. The Battle of Yehuling turned from a fight into a massacre. The Jin army disintegrated. Their sheer numbers became their curse. They trampled each other trying to escape the narrow valleys. The ground turned to a slush of mud and blood. Subutai cut his way through the chaos. He wasn't killing out of anger, he was dismantling the enemy. He targeted the officers, the flag bearers, the nodes of communication. He was breaking the nervous system of the giant. By sunset, the golden army of the Jin was gone. The path to Beijing, the capital of gold and silk, lay open. Genghis Khan rode through the field of bodies. He found Subutai sitting on a rock, wiping his blade. Subutai's face was splattered with blood, but he was calm. He was eating a piece of dried meat. Genghis looked at the mountain Subutai had descended. He shook his head. "They said it was impossible," Genghis said. "Impossible is just a word for something that has not been done yet," Subutai replied, standing up. "You broke the turtle's neck, Subutai," Genghis said, laughing. "Jeeb breaks doors. You break empires." "The empire is not broken yet, Great Khan," Subutai said, looking south toward the vast plains of China. "We have only broken the gate. Now we must enter the house." Genghis placed a hand on Subutai's shoulder. "Then enter it. Take what you need. But remember, the gold means nothing. The silk means nothing. It is the grass we want. It is the submission." Subutai looked at the burning horizon. He felt the vastness of the world expanding before him. He had conquered the forest. He had conquered the steppe. Now he had conquered the mountains. What was left? He looked west. Far beyond the setting sun, unknown lands whispered to him. One day, Subutai said to himself, "One day I will ride until the sun stops setting." The Iron General sheathed his sword. The east was falling. But the wolf was already dreaming of Thuist. Chapter 7: The Hunt for the Shah. The war with the Golden Empire in the east was paused. Not because it was finished, but because a greater insult had occurred in the west. It began with a caravan. Genghis Khan had sent merchants and ambassadors to the vast Islamic empire of Khwarazm, a land of ancient cities, blue-tiled mosques, and immense wealth that stretched from Persia to the Aral Sea. He sought trade. He sought peace. "I am the master of the lands of the rising sun," Genghis had written. "You are the master of the lands of the setting sun. Let there be friendship between us." The governor of the city of Otrar answered with steel. He accused the merchants of being spies. He slaughtered them. He seized their goods. When Genghis sent ambassadors to demand justice, the Shah of Khwarazm, Muhammad II, shaved off their beards and sent them back in shame. It was the greatest mistake in the history of the world. Genghis Khan climbed the sacred mountain of Burkhan Khaldun. He took off his hat. He loosened his belt. He prayed to the eternal blue sky for 3 days. When he came down, his eyes were burning with a cold, white fire. "They have chosen wind," Genghis whispered. "Now they will reap the whirlwind." The year was 1219. The Mongol army, now a veteran force of discipline and terror, marched west. The Shah of Khwarazm was not worried. He had an army of 400,000 men, vastly outnumbering the Mongols. He had heavy cavalry, armored elephants, and cities with walls 50 feet high. He looked at the map and saw the Kizilkum Desert, the Red Sands. A 300-mile expanse of waterless hell that protected his northern flank. "No army can cross the Red Sands," his generals told him. "They will attack from the south. We will wait for them in the cities." Subutai looked at the same map in the Mongol tent. He ran his calloused finger over the empty space of the Kizilkum. "They expect us here," Subutai said, pointing to the main road. "Genghis will take the main road. He will make a lot of noise. He will burn the grass. He will draw their eyes." "And you?" Genghis asked. "I will be the ghost," Subutai said. "I will cross the Red Sands." "There is no water," Jib warned. "The horses will die." "We will not bring herds," Subutai replied. "We will bring only the strongest mounts. We will drink the blood of the spare horses if we must. We will ride at night when the sand is cool. When we appear at the gates of Bukhara, they will think we fell from the sky." And so, the impossible march began. For weeks, Subutai's division disappeared from the world. They entered the Red Sands. It was a landscape of alien silence. Dunes of red dust shifted like waves in the ocean. The sun was a physical weight, hammering down on their helmets. Subutai rode at the front. His lips were cracked and bleeding. His tongue was swollen. But he did not stop. He monitored the discipline of water rationing with the ruthlessness of a machine. A man who drank more than his share was lashed. A man who let his horse stumble was left behind. They rode through the skeletons of previous travelers. They rode through the hallucinations of heat. Then, one morning, the haze lifted. The sentries on the walls of Bukhara rubbed their eyes. They looked north, towards the impenetrable desert. They expected to see nothing but heat waves. Instead, they saw dust. Then, they saw banners. Then, they saw the glint of thousands of sabers. Subutai had arrived. The shock paralyzed the Khwarazmian defense. The Shah, who was in Samarkand, heard the news and turned pale. "They are demons," he whispered. "They do not obey the laws of nature." Genghis Khan attacked from the front. Subutai attacked from the rear. The trap was sprung. The great cities fell one by one. Bukhara, Samarkand, Otrar. The punishment was biblical. Molten silver was poured into the eyes of the governor who had killed the merchants. The rivers ran red. But the Shah escaped. Muhammad II, the King of Kings, fled west. He ran with his treasury, his wives, and his best guards that he thought if he could just put enough distance between him and the Mongols, he would be safe. Het they would stop to loot the rich cities. He was wrong. Genghis Khan called Subutai and Jeeb to his tent. The city of Samarkand was burning in the background, casting a flickering orange light on their faces. "The Shah runs," Genghis said quietly. "He thinks distance will save him." He looked at his two dogs of war. "Jeeb, Subutai, I give you 20,000 men. I do not want cities. I do not want gold. I do not want land." Genghis leaned forward, his voice dropping to a hiss. "I want him. Chase him. Do not stop for food. Do not stop for sleep. If he flies to the sky, become falcons. If he burrows into the earth, become worms. Hunt him until he has nowhere left to run." The great raid began. This was no longer a war, it was a manhunt on a continental scale. Subutai and Jeeb detached from the main army and shot west like arrows released from a giant bow. They rode 80 miles a day. They switched horses while galloping. They ate raw meat to avoid stopping to cook. The Shah fled to Balkh. Subutai arrived hours after he left. The Shah fled to Nishapur. Subutai arrived the next day. The Shah fled to Ray, modern Tehran. Subutai was sniffing his tracks. It was psychological torture. Every time the Shah stopped to rest, to drink wine, to sleep in a palace, a scout would rush in, screaming, "They are coming. The dust is on the horizon." The Shah began to go mad. He abandoned his treasury. He abandoned his army. He abandoned his family. He trusted no one. He saw Mongol spies in every shadow. Subutai was relentless. He did not plunder the cities he passed, he simply rode through them. "We have no quarrel with you," he told the terrified citizens of Ray. "We want only the man who calls himself king." They chased him across the Zagros Mountains. They chased him through the bitter winter of Persia, they chased him to the shores of the Caspian Sea. Finally, the Shah ran out of land. At the edge of the Great Grey Sea, Muhammad II found a small boat. He rowed out to a tiny, leper colony island, miles from the shore. He had nothing left. No crown. No robes. No empire. He was shivering, starving, and broken. Subutai stood on the shore. The waves of the Caspian lapped at his horse's hooves. He watched the small boat disappear into the mist. Jeeb rode up beside him. "He has escaped to the water. Do we build ships?" Subutai shook his head. He watched the gray horizon. "No," Subutai said softly. "Look at him. He is alone. He is king of an island of lepers. He has no court, that he has no future. To kill him now would be a mercy." Subutai turned his horse away from the sea. "Let him live with his failure. The fear will kill him faster than our swords." Subutai was right. Within weeks, the Shah died on that island, of pleurisy, starvation, and a broken heart. He was buried in the ragged shirt of a servant. Subutai looked at his map. They were thousands of miles from Mongolia. They were on the edge of the known world. To the north lay the Caucasus Mountains. To the west, the mysterious lands of the Rus and the Kipchaks. Most generals would turn back. They had fulfilled their mission. The Shah was dead. But Subutai felt the old itch. The curiosity of the explorer. He looked at Jeeb. "The Khan said to hunt the Shah," Subutai said. "But he did not say to come straight back." Jeeb grinned, his teeth white in his bearded face. "What are you thinking, little blacksmith?" "I am thinking." Subutai pointed his saber north, towards the unknown peaks of the Caucasus. "I am thinking we should see what lies on the other side of those mountains. We should see if the world has an edge." The hunt was over. The reconnaissance of Europe was about to begin. Chapter 8, The Mountain Trap. The decision was made. They would not return to the warm pastures of Mongolia. They would climb the wall of the world. Subutai and Jeeb turned their army north, riding along the western coast of the Caspian Sea. The land began to heave and buckle. The flat desert gave way to rocky foothills, and the air grew thin and sharp. Ahead of them rose the Caucasus Mountains, a jagged spine of rock and ice that separated the known world from the legends of the north. But the mountains were not empty. They were guarded by the kingdom of Georgia. The Georgians were not like the Persians or the Chinese. They were a warrior people, hardened by centuries of fighting in the crags and valleys of their homeland. Their king, George IV, known as the Brilliant, was a man of immense pride. He led an army of knights, men clad in heavy chainmail from head to toe, riding massive warhorses bred for impact. They carried banners emblazoned with the Red Cross of Christ, preparing to join the Crusades in Jerusalem. When King George heard that a barbarian horde was approaching his borders, he did not tremble. Helot,
Let them come, he told his bishops. They are savages riding ponies. They have no armor. They have no honor. We will shatter them like glass against a rock. King George gathered his army, 30,000 heavy cavalry and 40,000 infantry. It was a force of iron and faith. Subutai watched them from a high ridge. He saw the sunlight glinting off their polished shields. He heard the heavy, rhythmic thud of their war horses. He turned to Jeeb. They are heavy, Subutai noted. Heavier than the Gene cataphracts. They look slow, Jeeb said, spitting on the ground. I can put an arrow in their eye slits before they even lift their lances. Do not underestimate the weight, Subutai warned. If they hit us in a charge, they will crush us. We're light. We cannot stop an avalanche. The first skirmish proved Subutai right. A detachment of Mongol light cavalry tried to harass the Georgian vanguard. The knights simply lowered their lances and charged. The arrows of the Mongols bounced harmlessly off the thick European chainmail. The knights smashed through the Mongol lines, trampling men and horses into the mud. For the first time in years, the Mongols were pushed back. The Georgians cheered. They believed they had won. Subutai sat by the fire that night, staring into the flames. He picked up a stone and a feather. Jeeb, he said. If I throw this stone at you, it will hurt. Yes, Jeeb agreed. But if I throw this feather, it does nothing. Subutai dropped the feather. It drifted on the wind. We cannot be the stone against these men. They are a bigger stone. We must be the feather. We must make them swing at the air until they fall over. The next morning, the Mongols formed a battle line in the grassy valley of Kunan. King George saw them and ordered the charge. 10,000 knights spurred their horses into a gallop. The ground shook. It was a terrifying sight, a wall of steel moving at 30 miles per hour. But just before the impact, the Mongols broke. They didn't break in panic, they broke in unison. They turned their horses around and fled. They run. King George shouted, his blood up. Chase them down. Do not let a single heathen escape. The Georgians pursued. And this was their mistake. They were riding heavy horses, carrying 60 pounds of steel armor, riding uphill. The Mongols were riding light ponies, wearing leather. For 10 miles, the chase continued. Subutai and Jeeb led the enemy deeper into the rocky terrain. They rode just fast enough to stay out of reach, but slow enough to keep the Georgians hopeful. Subutai looked back. He watched the structure of the Georgian army disintegrate. The fastest knights were miles ahead of the slow ones. The infantry was left far behind. The horses were foaming with white sweat, their flanks heaving, their lungs burning in the mountain air. The wall of steel had become a long, thin, exhausted line. They reached a narrow pass where the cliffs rose high on both sides. Subutai raised his whip. The Mongol retreat stopped instantly. 20,000 riders drifted to a halt, turned their mounts, and notched their arrows. The sudden stop was unnatural, like a video reel played in reverse. The leading Georgian knights, breathless and tired, suddenly found themselves facing a storm. Now, Subutai whispered. The air turned black with arrows. At this close range, the Mongols didn't aim for the men, they aimed for the horses. The unarmored legs and necks of the great European chargers were struck. The horses collapsed, screaming, throwing their riders to the ground. A knight on the ground is a turtle on its back. He is heavy. He is slow. Jeeb drew his saber and signaled the charge. The fresh Mongol horses crashed into the exhausted Georgian line. It was a slaughter. The knights tried to lift their heavy swords, but their arms were like lead. The Mongols danced around them, slashing at the gaps in the armor, pulling men from their saddles with hooks. King George fought bravely, but he watched his brilliant army systematically dismantled. He barely escaped with his life, fleeing back to Tbilisi with a chest wound that would eventually kill him. The anvil had been destroyed not by a hammer, but by the distance. The battle was won, but the war against the mountain had just begun. To continue north. The spirits are hungry. Jeeb laughed. Good. I am hungry too. The climb was a nightmare of ice and wind. As they ascended past the tree line, the air became so thin it felt like breathing glass. The path was often buried under 10 feet of snow. Subutai did not ride. He walked. He ordered every man to dismount to save the horses. They wrapped the horses' hooves in strips of felt to prevent them from slipping on the ice. When the snow was too deep, Subutai took a shovel. The general of the empire stood shoulder-to-shoulder with the lowest recruit, digging a trench through the white hell. Men died. Some slipped and fell silently into the abyss. Others simply sat down to rest and never stood up, frozen solid in minutes. One night, a blizzard struck. The wind howled like 1,000 demons. The army huddled together in snow caves, sharing body heat. Subutai sat at the entrance of a cave, watching the storm. His eyebrows were caked in ice. A young soldier, shivering violently, looked at him. "General, are we lost?" Subutai looked at the boy. He remembered the forest. He remembered the cold of his childhood. "Iron does not get lost," Subutai said, his voice cutting through the wind. "Iron endures. The mountain is testing us. It wants to know if we are worthy of the lands on the other side. Do not shiver. Shivering is a waste of energy. Be still. Be the stone." The storm lasted 2 days. When it cleared, they saw it. The summit. They crested the peaks of Dagestan. They looked down. The world dropped away beneath their feet, and there, stretching endlessly to the north, lay a new world. The Kipchak Steppe. The vast plains of Russia. It was green. It was flat. It was infinite. Subutai took a deep breath. He felt the blood returning to his frozen limbs. He had defeated the knights of the west. He had defeated the mountain of the north. He mounted his horse. He looked at Jeeb, who was grinning through a mask of frost. "New grass," Jeeb said. "New enemies," Subutai corrected him. They began the descent. The wolf had crossed the wall. And the princes of Russia, sleeping in their wooden palaces, had no idea that the winter was coming for them. Chapter 9, The Sin of the Princes. The Kipchak steppe was not like the Mongolian steppe. The grass here was taller, thicker, fed by the deep black soil of the west. It smelled of damp earth and wildflowers. It was a land of abundance. Subutai and Jeeb rode down from the mountains like wolves descending into a sheepfold. They were far from home, more than 4,000 miles from the Onon River. Their supplies were low. Their horses were lean. Their armor was battered and rusted from the mountain snows. To the local tribes, the Kumans, also known as the Kipchaks, these strangers looked like beggars, they looked weak. Kodian Khan, the leader of the Cumans, fled before them. He ran west, to the great wooden cities of the Rus. He rode into the court of Mstislav the Bold, the prince of Galicia. Khodian threw his hat on the ground. He tore his clothes. He wept. "They are coming!" Khodian screamed to the assembled Russian princes. "Men with faces like flat stones. They have taken our land today. Tomorrow, they will take yours." The princes of Rus were powerful men. They ruled over cities that were older and richer than anything in the steppe. Kiev, Chernigov, Galicia. They wore heavy cloaks of velvet and furs. They drank mead from golden goblets. They looked at this weeping nomad with disdain. "Who are these men?" Mstislav asked, leaning back in his carved throne. "Tartars? Mongols? We have never heard of them." "They are demons," Khodian warned. "They ride on the wind." Mstislav laughed. He looked at his fellow princes. There was Mstislav of Kiev, a proud and cautious man. There was Daniel of Volhynia. They were rivals, often fighting each other for territory. But the promise of a new war, a crusade against unknown heathens, united them. "We will help you," Khodian, Mstislav the Bold declared. "Not because we fear these horsemen, but because we need practice. We will ride out. We will crush them. And we will take their horses as a prize." The call to arms went out. From the forests of the north to the rivers of the south, the Rus gathered. It was a magnificent host. 80,000 men. There were the Druzina, the elite heavy cavalry, knights in chainmail as strong as any in Europe. There were the peasant militias, carrying spears and axes. There were the Cuman archers. It was an army of iron. An army that shook the earth when it marched. Subutai sat on his horse, watching the horizon. His scouts had brought him the numbers. 80,000, Jeeb said, whistling through his teeth. "That is a lot of meat to chop. We have barely 20,000. "They are many," Subutai agreed. "But they are not one. Look at their banners. 3 different princes point 3 different commands. A body with 3 heads cannot decide which way to turn." Subutai decided to test them. He sent 10 ambassadors to the Rus camp. These were not warriors, they were diplomats. They rode under the white flag of truce. They carried a message of peace. "We have no quarrel with you," the message read. "We only hunt the Cumans, our ancient slaves who fled from us. Do not fight for them. Let us be friends." The ambassadors arrived at the Rus camp near the Dnieper River. They expected to be treated with the sacred laws of hospitality. Instead, the Rus princes saw weakness. They thought the Mongols were begging for mercy because they were afraid. "They plead for peace before the first sword is drawn," Mstislav of Kiev sneered. "They are cowards." And then, the Rus did the unthinkable. The unforgivable. They dragged the 10 Mongol ambassadors from their horses. They beat them. And then, in full view of the army, they executed them. When the news reached Subutai, he did not rage. He did not shout. He went very still. To a Mongol, the ambassador is sacred. He is the voice of the Khan. To kill an ambassador is not an act of war, it is a blasphemy against the sky itself. It removes the enemy from the category of human. Subutai looked at Jeeb. Jeeb was trembling with fury, his hand gripping his sword so tight his knuckles were white. "They killed the envoys," Jeeb whispered. "They killed the peace." "Then there is no peace," Subutai said. His voice was cold, devoid of any emotion. It was the sound of a judge passing a death sentence. "They have chosen not to fight us. They have chosen to be exterminated." Subutai turned his horse around. He faced east, away from the enemy. "We retreat," Subutai commanded. "Retreat?" a young commander asked, confused. "We fight for the blood debt." "We retreat," Subutai repeated. "They are 80,000. They are confident. They are arrogant. If we fight them here, by the river, their weight will crush us. We must stretch them." Subutai made a pulling motion with his hands, like stretching a piece of raw dough. "We will run. We will let them chase us. We will make them think we are terrified dogs. We will drag them across the steppe until their horses are tired, until their heavy armor feels like a stone around their necks, until their three heads are arguing with each other." "And then?" Jeeb asked, a cruel smile returning to his face. "And then," Subutai said, "when they are stretched thin, we will snap the neck." The great retreat began. The Mongol army turned their backs on the Rus. They rode east. They did not ride at full speed. They rode just fast enough to stay out of range, but slow enough to be seen. They left behind carts of food, they left behind cattle. The Rus army saw the dust. They saw the abandoned loot. "They are running." Mstislav the Bold shouted, seeing his prophecy come true. "The cowards are fleeing back to the mountains. Chase them. Do not let them escape." The Rus took the bait. The scent of easy victory filled their nostrils. The heavy night spurred their chargers. The infantry began to run. The Cumans galloped ahead. For 1 day. 2 days. 3 days. The chase continued. The sun beat down. The dust choked them. Subutai rode at the rear of his column. He watched the enemy. He saw what he wanted to see. The Ruzarmi was losing its shape. The eager princes were riding fast, leaving their infantry miles behind. The supply wagons were lost. The coherence of the massive army was unraveling into a long, thin, disorganized line. 5 days. 6 days. "Are we there yet?" Jeeb asked on the 7th day. "My sword is getting rusty." "Not yet," Subutai said, looking at the ground. "The grass is too flat here. I need a place where the land helps us. I need a river." 8 days. 9 days. On the morning of the 9th day, they reached it. The Kalka River. It was a small, winding river, surrounded by rocky hills and tall reeds. The water was gray and sluggish. The mist hung low over the valley. Subutai crossed the river. He rode up a small hill on the eastern bank. He looked back west. He saw the Rus vanguard arriving. They were exhausted. Their horses were foaming. Their formation was gone. They were just a mob of angry, tired men. And miles behind them, the rest of their army was strung out, unaware of what was happening at the front. Subutai stopped his horse. He planted his spear in the ground. "Here," Subutai said. He turned to his standard bearer. "Raise the spirit banner. The retreat is over." The black banner of war rose into the gray sky. 20,000 Mongol warriors stopped. They turned their horses around. The dust settled. The silence of the steppe returned, heavy and ominous. The running dogs had stopped running. The wolf had turned to face the hounds. Subutai drew his father's knife, the small blacksmith's blade he still carried. He tested the edge on his thumb. A drop of blood appeared. "They killed the envoys," Subutai whispered to the wind. "Now they pay the price." The trap was set. The Kalka River was hungry. Chapter 10, The Feast of Bones. The morning of May 31, 1223. The mist over the Kalka River began to lift, revealing the battlefield that Subutai had chosen. The Rus vanguard, led by Mstislav the Bold and the Cuman cavalry, splashed across the shallow river. They were cheering. They had been chasing the cowardly Mongols for 9 days. They believed the enemy was broken, terrified, and running for their lives. When Mstislav reached the eastern bank, he saw the Mongols. But they were not running. The 20,000 horsemen sat motionless in the tall grass. Their horses were not heaving with exhaustion, they were fresh, their coats brushed and sleek. The riders were not looking over their shoulders in panic, they were checking their saddle girths with the calm precision of executioners. The cheering of the Rus stopped. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the sound of the river flowing over stones. Subutai sat on the hill. He saw the confusion ripple through the enemy ranks. He saw Mstislav realize, too late, that the mouse had walked into the snake's burrow. "They are not tired," Mstislav whispered, his face draining of color. Subutai raised his right hand. He didn't scream a war cry. He simply dropped his hand. The Mongol heavy lancers, the iron wolves, lowered their long spears. These were not the light archers the Rus were used to. These were men and horses clad in heavy lamellar armor. They surged forward like a landslide. The impact was cataclysmic. The Mongol charge hit the Cuman light cavalry first. The Cumans, who were already tired from the chase, shattered instantly. They turned their horses and fled in panic. But here was the genius of Subutai's positioning. The fleeing Cumans did not run into an empty field. They ran straight back into the river, right into the faces of the Rus infantry that was still trying to cross. Chaos erupted. "Go back! Go back!" the Rus officers screamed, but the roar of the battle drowned them out. The fleeing horsemen crashed into their own allies. Men were trampled. Lines were broken. The heavy Rus knights, stuck in the mud of the riverbank, could not maneuver. They were packed together so tightly they couldn't even lift their swords. And then, the Mongol archers began to fire. Subutai watched from the hill. He saw the structure of the Rus army collapse into a screaming, writhing mass of metal and flesh. It was no longer an army, it was a mob. "Look at them," Jeeb said, riding up beside him. "They are fighting each other to get away from us." "They are not fighting us," Subutai said calmly. "They are fighting the ground. They are fighting the river. We are just the wind that pushes them." The slaughter lasted for hours. The Kalka River turned red. The pride of the Rus, the 80,000 men who had marched out with golden banners, was systematically destroyed. The Mongols rode them down like tall grass. 6 princes were killed in the mud. 70 noblemen fell. The peasant infantry, abandoned by their lords, were hunted down across the steppe for miles. But one prince remained. Mstislav of Kiev, the most cautious of the princes, had not crossed the river. He had watched the massacre from a fortified hill on the western bank. He had built a wooden stockade and surrounded himself with 10,000 of his best men. For 3 days, the Mongols circled the hill. They could not break the fortifications easily. Subutai rode to the base of the hill. He sent a new messenger. "Surrender," the messenger shouted. "The battle is lost. If you come down and lay down your weapons, Subutai promises that no blood will be shed. You will be allowed to go home." Mstislav of Kiev looked at the carnage below. He looked at his starving men. He looked at the endless circle of Mongol wolves. He believed the promise. He surrendered. He opened the gates. His men laid down their swords. But Mstislav had forgotten who he was dealing with. He had forgotten the 10 dead ambassadors. Subutai watched the Rus soldiers walk out. He ordered the common soldiers to be taken as slaves. But for the princes and the high nobility, the men who had ordered the murder of the envoys, he had a special plan. You promised. Mstislav shouted as the Mongols seized him. You promised that no blood would besht. Subutai looked at him with eyes as cold as the Siberian winter. I promised that no blood would be shed, Subutai said. And I keep my word. I will not cut you. I will not pierce you. The Mongols dug a shallow pit in the ground. They threw the bound Russian princes, Mstislav and 2 others, into the pit. Then, they laid heavy wooden planks over the pit, covering the living men. Subutai signaled to his army. Bring the feast. The Mongol generals gathered on top of the wooden platform. They set up tables. They brought roasted mutton and fermented mare's milk. They sat down to celebrate their victory. Subutai sat directly over the place where Mstislav lay. As the Mongols ate, drank, and stamped their feet to the music of drums and fiddles, the heavy wooden planks pressed down. Below the floorboards, the princes were not shedding blood. They were being crushed. They were suffocating under the weight of the victors. Their screams were drowned out by the laughter and the songs of the Mongols above. It was a slow, terrifying death. A death of absolute domination. Subutai ate his meal calmly. He felt the vibrations of the struggle beneath his feet fading away, until there was only stillness. He took a sip of kumis. He looked at Jeeb. The debt is paid, Subutai said. The ambassadors can rest now. The Battle of Khalkha was over. The Rus army was annihilated. The Mongols had wiped out the fighting strength of an entire civilization in a single afternoon. But Subutai looked west again. He saw more lands. Hungary. Poland. Europe. He knew he could take them all. The path was open. However, a rider arrived from the east with urgent orders. The great Khan, Genghis, summoned them back. The campaign was over. They had been gone for 3 years. They had ridden 5,000 miles. They had won every battle. Subutai stood up from the feast. He walked to the edge of the platform and looked at the Red River. We leave now, Subutai told his men. But look at this land well. Memorize the rivers. Memorize the grass. Because we will come back. He mounted his horse. The wolf of the steppe turned east, toward the rising sun. He left behind a legend of terror that would haunt the Russian people for centuries. The Tartar yoke had begun. But for Subutai, it was just another problem solved. Another structure broken. Another piece of iron hammered into shape. The reconnaissance was finished. The conquest was yet to come. Chapter 11, The Broken Arrow. The journey home was long. The exhilaration of the victory at Khalkha faded, replaced by the crushing monotony of the road. They were riding back across the world they had just conquered. But the steppe demands a toll for every victory. Somewhere east of the Volga River, amidst the endless sea of grass, Jeeb slowed his horse. Jeeb, the arrow, the man who had laughed in the face of death 1,000 times, looked pale. He coughed, a wet, rattling sound that shook his thin frame. The air is too thick here, Jeeb rasped, trying to smile. I miss the thin air of the mountains. Subutai looked at his friend. He saw the fever burning in Jeeb's eyes. He saw the way his hands trembled on the reins. A fever had taken hold of the camp, a sickness bred from the bad water and the exhaustion of 3 years of constant war. 2 days later, Jeeb could no longer ride. They made a litter for him, carried between 2 horses. For a man like Jeeb, who lived in the saddle, this was a humiliation worse than defeat. On the 3rd night, Subutai sat beside Jeeb's furs. The campfire popped and hissed. The stars above were indifferent. Do not look so grim, little blacksmith, Jeeb whispered. His voice was a shadow of the roar that had terrified empires. We saw the edge, didn't we? We saw the ocean. We saw it, Subutai said, gripping Jeeb's cold hand. They will talk about us, Jeeb said, his eyes unfocused. When the wolves howl, they will say it is Jeeb and Subutai hunting in the night. Rest now, Subutai said, his throat tight. We are almost home. Home. Jeeb breathed. My home is the saddle. Jeeb died before dawn. The arrow that had been shot from the bow of Genghis Khan finally fell forth. Subutai did not weep. He did not wail. He washed Jeeb's body. He dressed him in his finest silk deal, looted from a Persian city. He placed Jeeb's bow in his hands. They did not bury him. A Mongol belongs to the sky. They left him on a high ridge, facing west, towards the lands he had conquered. The wolves and the eagles would take him. Subutai mounted his horse and turned east. He felt a sudden, crushing weight. For 20 years, Jebba had been his right hand. Jeeb was the fire, Subutai was the iron. Now, the fire was out. The Iron General was alone. The year was 1225 when Subutai finally rode into the main camp of Genghis Khan by the Tula River. He had left as a young general. He returned as a legend. The soldiers lined the path, bowing their heads in reverence. They whispered his name, Subutai. The bag hater. The valiant. But the camp had changed. The energy was different. It was quieter. Subutai walked into the great yurt. The air smelled of medicinal herbs. Genghis Khan sat on his throne. He was old now. His beard was white. His face was a map of deep wrinkles, etched by 60 years of struggle. The eyes that had terrified the world were dim, clouded by pain. He had fallen from his horse during a hunt, and the internal injuries were slowly killing him. Subutai knelt and touched his forehead to the floor. You have returned, Genghis said. His voice was weak, but the authority was still there. Where is Jeeb? He rides in the eternal blue sky, my Khan, Subutai replied. Genghis nodded slowly. He did not show grief. He accepted death as he accepted winter. He was a good dog. He bit deep. The Khan beckoned Subutai closer. Tell me, Genghis whispered. Tell me of the west. Tell me of the lands where the sun sets. For hours, Subutai spoke. He was the storyteller now. He spoke of the Rus princes and their golden shields. He spoke of the Hungarians and their stone bridges. He spoke of the green grass that stretched to the end of the world, grass enough to feed all the Mongol horses for 1,000 years. It is a good land, Subutai concluded. A rich land. And it is weak. They are divided. They fight each other. Genghis listened, his eyes closed. He was dreaming of a conquest he would never see. My time is short, Subutai, Genghis said. The Tanguts have rebelled again. I must go to punish them. It will be my last ride. He opened his eyes and grabbed Subutai's wrist. But you must not stop. My sons. Joki, Shugatai, Ogidii, Talyui, they are strong, but they are quarrelsome. They will need you. You are the iron beam that holds the yurt together. I will serve them as I served you, Subutai promised. The west, Genghis hissed, a sudden spark of the old fire returning. Do not let my sons forget Thuist. That is our inheritance. Go back there, Subutai. Finish what you started. Conquer it all. Until the hoof of the Mongol horse touches the last sea. 2 years later, in 1227, the world shook. Genghis Khan died. The man who had united the felt-walled tents, who had slaughtered millions and built an empire of law, was gone. A silence fell over the steppe that was louder than any thunder. Warriors who had never known fear wept openly in the dirt. They buried him in a secret place, near the sacred mountain of Burkhan Khaldun. 1,000 horsemen rode over the grave until the ground was flat, so that no one would ever disturb his rest. Then, the uncertainty began. The empire held its breath. Would the sons fight? Would the structure collapse? At the great Kurultai to choose the new Khan, the princes gathered. Tension was high. Arguments broke out. Hands drifted to sword hilts. But in the background, silent and watchful, stood the old guard. The generals. And foremost among them was Subutai. He stood behind Ogedei, the son Genghis had chosen. Subutai did not speak, but his presence was a message: the army stands with Ogedei. Because of this silent strength, the transition was peaceful. Ogedei was raised on the white felt rug. He became the Khagan. Ogedei was not his father. He was kinder, softer, fond of wine and building cities. He built a great capital at Karakoram, with walls of mud brick and fountains of silver. He called Subutai to him. "My father gave you a task," Ogedei said. "He told you to conquer the West." "He did, great Khan. But I am tired of war for now," Ogedei sighed. "We must consolidate. We must build. The West can wait." Subutai bowed. He was a servant. He obeyed. But he did not forget. For the next 7 years, Subutai waited. He did not rust. He fought in China, finishing the destruction of the Jin. He trained a new generation of soldiers. He refined his maps. He improved his siege engines. He was 50 years old. Then 55. His hair turned gray. His joints began to ache in the winter. Younger generals began to whisper. "Subutai is old," they said. "He is a relic of the past. His time is done." Subutai heard them. He said nothing. He sat in his yurt, looking at the map of Europe he had drawn from memory. He looked at the rivers. The Danube. The Volga. The Rhine. He knew the time would come. He knew that Ogedei would eventually look for glory. And when that day came, the old wolf would rise one last time. He would not just raid the West. He would not just scout it. He would swallow it whole. The broken arrow of Jebe lay on the mountain. But the bow of Subutai was still strung. And the tension was building. Here is chapter 12 of the epic. In this chapter, the hibernation ends. The largest army the Mongols have ever assembled prepares Tamov. But Subutai faces a new kind of enemy, not soldiers on a battlefield, but the arrogance of the young Mongol princes who believe they know better than the old dog of war. The Wolf of the Steppe, the Epic of Subutai. Chapter 12, The Gathering of the Clouds. The year was 1235. The location was Karakoram. The new capital of the Mongol Empire was a strange beast. It sat on the open steppe like a jeweled saddle on a wild horse. It had walls of mud brick, markets filled with Persian glass and Chinese silk, and fountains that poured wine and fermented milk from silver spouts. Subutai walked through the streets. He was 60 years old now. His limp, a souvenir from a Jin arrow, was more pronounced. His hair was snow white, tied back in a simple knot. He wore plain leather, refusing the silk robes that the younger generals favored. He felt out of place here. This city was built for politicians, for merchants, for courtiers. It was not built for wolves. He arrived at the palace of the great Khan. Ogedei sat on his throne, his face flushed with wine, but his eyes were sharp. Around him sat the future of the empire, the grandsons of Genghis Khan. There was Batu, the son of Joki. He was quiet, intelligent, carrying the burden of his father's questionable lineage. He was the Khan of the Golden Horde, the ruler of the West. There was Gayuk, the son of Ogidi. He was loud, arrogant, and hungry for glory. There was Monk, the son of Talyui, serious and grim. And Buri, the grandson of Subutai. Violent and unpredictable. They were the eldest sons. The golden generation. They had grown up hearing stories of how their grandfathers had conquered the world. They believed it was their turn. They believed it would be easy. Ogidi raised his hand, silencing the room. The time has come, Ogidi announced. My father's will is not yet fulfilled. The West remains defiant. The Rus have rebuilt their cities. The Hungarians protect our enemies. The Pope in Rome believes he is the representative of God. Ogidi pointed a trembling finger at the map. We will send a storm such as the world has never seen. Not a raid. Not a skirmish. An invasion. We will tear down the stone walls of Europe and water our horses in the Great Sea. A cheer went up from the princes. Gayuk slammed his goblet on the table. We will crush them. I will bring you the head of the king of the Franks. Ogidi waited for the noise to die down. Then he looked at the back of the room, where the old man in leather stood in the shadows. Batu will lead this army, Ogidi said. He is a prince of the blood. The glory will be his. Batu bowed. Gayuk scowled, jealous of the command. But, Ogidi continued, his voice hardening. Batu is young. The West is treacherous. An army of lions led by a deer will die. So I am sending a wolf to lead the lions. Ogidi beckoned Subutai forward. Subutai Baghader. You have walked this path before. You know the rivers. You know the mountains, you will be the Orlok, the marshal. You will plan the battles. You will direct the march. The princes will command the men, but you will command the princes. The room went silent. The tension was palpable. These young princes, royal blood flowing in their veins, were being told to obey a blacksmith's son. A man who was essentially a servant. Gayuk sneered. The old man. He can barely walk. Does he need a nursemaid to help him onto his horse? Subutai stopped. He turned slowly to face Gayuk. He did not bow. He did not avert his gaze. He looked at the prince with the flat, indifferent stare of a reptile. I do not need a nursemaid, Prince Gayuk, Subutai said, his voice like grinding gravel. And I do not need legs to fight. My mind has traveled further than you have ever ridden. You see the sword in your hand. I see the map in my head. If you listen to me, you will live to cover yourself in glory. If you ignore me, your bones will bleach in a foreign field. Gayuk's hand drifted to his dagger. But Batu stepped between them. We will listen, Batu said firmly. He was smart enough to know that Subutai was the only reason they had a chance. The general served my grandfather. He is the sword of the empire. The preparation for the campaign took a year. This was not a horde, it was a migration of destruction. 150,000 soldiers. 300,000 horses. Thousands of siege engineers from China, experts in gunpowder and ballistics. Tens of thousands of carts carrying grain, tents, and arrows. It was the largest army the Mongols had ever assembled. In the spring of 1236, the beast began to move. The ground shook for miles. The dust cloud blocked out the sun. Subutai did not ride a horse for long distances anymore. He traveled in an iron-reinforced carriage, surrounded by maps and scrolls. He was the brain of the beast. His first target was personal. Before they reached the Rus, they had to pass the Volga Bulgars. Years ago, after the Battle of Khalkha, Asmal Mongol detachment had been ambushed and humiliated by these people. It was the only blemish in Subutai's record. He had not forgotten. They laughed at us, Subutai told Batu as they approached the Bulgar border. They said the Mongols bleed. What is the plan? Batu asked. Do we surround them? No, Subutai said. We erase them. The assault on Volga Bulgaria was terrifyingly efficient. Subutai did not use fancy tactics. He used overwhelming force. He unleashed the Chinese siege engines. Pots of naphtha, liquid fire, rained down on the wooden forts. The Bulgars were burned alive in their homes. Those who ran were hunted down by the princes, eager to blood their swords. In 2 months, a civilization that had lasted for centuries was wiped from the map. Subutai watched the capital city of Byler burn. He felt nothing. This was just housekeeping. Clearing the path. But as the army turned west, towards the lands of the Rus, the internal conflict began to bubble. At a feast one night, Gayuk, drunk on victory, stood up. See! Gayuk shouted. It is easy. The old man worries too much. We are the golden generation. We're invincible. Subutai sat quietly, drinking his tea. He knew the Rus would be harder. The Bulgars were a tribe. The Rus were a collection of states, with stone citadels and forests that could hide armies. Enjoy your wine, Prince, Subutai murmured to himself. Winter is coming. And the Rus winter is not like the Bulgar summer. He looked at the sky. The clouds were gathering. Heavy, gray snow clouds. Subutai closed his eyes and visualized the map of Russia. He saw the great rivers acting as highways of ice. He saw the cities sitting like ripe fruit waiting to be plucked. He formulated a plan that defied all military logic. Most armies stop in winter. The cold kills horses. The snow stops wagons. But Subutai decided that winter would be his ally. We will attack when the rivers freeze, he decided. We will use their rivers as roads to ride straight to their gates. While they huddle by their fires, we will bring the fire to them. The old wolf was leading the pack into the snow once again. And this time, he would not stop until he raked the Atlantic. Chapter 13, The Frozen Road. History tells us that General Winter is the guardian of Russia. Invaders come in the summer, but they die in the snow. The mud traps them. The cold freezes the oil in their machines and the blood in their veins. But history forgets that the Mongols did not fear the cold. They were born in it. It was December 1237. The temperature on the Russian plains dropped so low that trees exploded from the expanding sap. The rivers, the Volga, the Oka, the Khwarazmian, froze solid, turning into highways off white ice. For any other army, this was a death sentence. For Subutai, it was the green light. While the Rus princes huddled in their wooden Kremlins, drinking mead and waiting for spring, Subutai unleashed the beast. The Mongol horses, shaggy and tough, dug through the snow to find grass. The soldiers wore layers of silk under their fur. If an arrow pierced them, the silk pushed into the wound, making it easier to pull the arrowhead out. They rubbed their faces with grease to prevent frostbite. They did not march through the deep snow of the forests. They rode on the frozen rivers. The ice was smooth. It was fast. It led straight to the gates of the enemy. The first city to face the storm was Ryazan. Subutai sent a woman, a sorceress captured from the Bulgars, as his messenger. He wanted to frighten them. But he also sent a clear demand. Give us a tithe, the message said. 10% of your wealth. 10% of your men. 10% off your horses. And we will leave you in peace. The Prince of Ryazan, Yuri Igorevich, stood on his wooden walls. He looked at the vast Mongol host darkening the white snow. He was proud. He was foolish. If you want our wealth, the prince shouted back, you can have it all, after we are dead. Subutai received the message in his carriage. He was wrapped in 3 layers of wolf pelt. He sighed. They always choose the hard way, Subutai murmured. They think walls made of wood can stop fire. He signaled to the Chinese engineers. The great machines were wheeled forward on sleds. These were not primitive catapults, they were counterweight trebuchets and ballistae powered by torsion springs. The bombardment began. But they did not throw stones. They threw pots of burning naphtha. They threw heavy logs spiked with iron. For 5 days, Ryazan burned. The wooden walls turned into a ring of fire. The defenders fought bravely, pouring water on the flames, but the water froze instantly, creating slippery sheets of ice that made the walls impossible to stand on. On the 6th day, the walls were breached. The Mongols poured in. The prince's boast came true. They took everything, but only after everyone was dead. The city of Ryazan was erased so completely that when travelers came years later, they found only wolves gnawing on bones amidst the ashes. But the Rus were not cowards. They were warriors of the north. News of the massacre at Ryazan spread. The Grand Prince of Vladimir, Yuri II, realized the danger. Hastened his army to stop the Mongols at the city of Kolomna. This was not a siege. This was a pitched battle. The Battle of Kolomna was brutal. The Rus heavy cavalry, the Druzina, charged the Mongol vanguard. They smashed into the Mongol lines with the force of desperate men. In the chaos, a tragedy occurred. Kulkin, a son of Genghis Khan, from a lesser wife, was struck by a Russian arrow. He fell from his horse and died in the snow. A silence fell over the Mongol ranks. A Genghisid prince had fallen. This was a grave omen. Batu Khan was furious. He wanted to charge blindly to avenge his uncle. But Subutai rode forward. He grabbed the bridle of Batu's horse. Do not let anger hold the reins. Subutai snapped, his voice cutting through the noise of battle. They want you to charge. Look. They are bracing their spears. Subutai pointed. The Rus infantry had formed a shield wall, spears pointing out like a porcupine. Back. Subutai ordered. Feigned retreat. The Mongols pulled back. The Rus, thinking they had killed a prince and broken the enemy spirit, cheered and broke their formation to pursue. As soon as the shield wall opened, Subutai unleashed the heavy lancers. They hit the disorganized Rus infantry like a hammer hitting an egg. The vengeance for Kulkin was terrible. The entire Rus army was slaughtered. The snow at Kolomna turned black with blood. Now, the path to the capital was open. Vladimir. The Golden City. Subutai did not rest. He drove the army hard. They rode day and night along the frozen Khwarazmian River, they moved faster than news could travel. When they arrived at Vladimir, the Grand Prince had fled north to gather a new army, leaving his wife and children behind in the supposed safety of the Golden Gate. It was February 1238. The heart of the Russian winter. The Mongols surrounded the city. They built a wooden wall around the city walls, trapping the defenders inside. This was Subutai's signature, the ring. No one gets out. The assault was relentless. The Chinese engineers undermined the walls with gunpowder charges, a technology the Rus had never seen. Thunder from the earth, they called it. The walls collapsed. The Mongols flooded the streets. The Grand Princess and the nobility fled to the Cathedral of the Assumption. They locked the heavy iron doors. They prayed to the Virgin Mary, weeping, holding candles in the darkness. Subutai stood outside the cathedral. He heard the singing inside. "Open the doors," he ordered his men. They piled wood against the cathedral. They set it on fire. The heat became intense. The stone walls grew hot. The oxygen inside was sucked out. The singing stopped. Vladimir fell. The capital of the Rus was a smoking ruin. Subutai stood on the walls of the conquered city. He looked north. The Grand Prince Yuri was still out there, hiding in the deep forests near the Sit River, waiting for spring to counterattack. Batu approached Subutai. Batu was covered in soot, his eyes wide with the adrenaline of conquest. "We have taken the heart," Batu said. "Now we wait for spring." "No," Subutai said, shaking his head. "If we wait for spring, the mud will trap us. The Russian mud, the Rasputitsa, is an enemy worse than their knights." Subutai pointed his gloved hand into the dark, frozen forest. "We finish it now. We split the army. We form the great hunt. We comb the forest. We find the Grand Prince, and we end this before the ice melts." "But the men are tired," Batu argued. "The horses are thin." "Iron does not get tired," Subutai said, repeating the mantra of his life. "We ride tonight." The wolf turned his face to the north wind. The winter apocalypse was not over yet. The Grand Prince was waiting in the woods, thinking he was safe in the silence of the trees. He was wrong. The shadow of the steppe could see in the dark. Chapter 14, The Ghosts of the Sit River. The conquest of the cities was over, but the conquest of the spirit remained. Grand Prince Yuri II of Vladimir had fled his burning capital. He was not a coward, he was a desperate man trying to save his people. He retreated deep into the north, into the dense, frozen forests along the Sit River. This was a place where the sun rarely touched the ground. The pine trees grew so close together that they formed a wall of black wood and needles. The snow was chest deep. It was a landscape that had defeated invaders for 1,000 years. "They cannot find us here," Prince Yuri told his shivering commanders. "They are men of the open plains. Their horses need grass. In this forest, their horses will starve. They will get lost in the maze off trees. We will wait for spring, and then we will strike." Yuri gathered the remnants of the Rus armies, 3 regiments, nearly 40,000 men. They built a hidden camp. They lit small fires to keep from freezing, hoping the smoke would disperse in the heavy mist. They waited in the silence, listening to the cracking of the ice and the hooting of owls. But silence is not safety when you are hunted by a wolf. Subutai did not need to see the camp to find it. He used the logic of the predator. He captured a Rus scout patrol near the edge of the forest. He did not ask them where the prince was, he knew they wouldn't talk. Instead, he separated them. He fed them. He watched them. He saw which direction their eyes looked when they were frightened. He saw the mud on their boots, a specific type of clay found only near the riverbanks. "Burundi," Subutai called to his most ferocious vanguard commander. "General, take the 2 muns of the right. Enter the forest. Do not ride in a column. Spread out like a net. Move silently. No drums. No horns. If a horse whinnies, cut its throat." On the morning of March 4, 1238, a heavy fog blanketed the Sit River. The Rus soldiers were asleep or praying. They felt safe in their white cocoon. Suddenly, the fog did not just lift, it tore apart. From the tree line, thousands of dark shapes emerged. They did not look like men, they looked like demons born from the bark of the trees. The Mongols had wrapped their armor in cloth to stop thiclanking. They had crawled through the snow. The Battle of the Sit River was not a battle. It was a panic. Prince Yuri ran out of his tent, sword in hand, but it was too late. The Mongols were already inside the camp. The Rus soldiers, heavy in their winter coats, tried to form a shield wall, but the Mongols didn't give them time. They rode their small, agile horses between the tents, slashing left and right with their curved sabers. The Rus tried to flee across the frozen river. But Subutai had foreseen this. He had positioned archers on the opposite bank hours before the attack began. As the Russians ran onto the ice, they were met with a hail of black arrows. The ice turned red. Prince Yuri fought bravely, surrounded by his personal guard. But bravery is no match for encirclement. He fell in the snow, his blood melting a small circle in the white crust. Subutai arrived hours later. His carriage wheels crunched over the frozen ground. He looked at the devastation. The entire military power of northern Russia lay dead in the forest. He did not smile. He simply nodded. The flank was secure. "The bear is dead," Subutai whispered. "Now, we hunt the eagle." He turned his eyes to the west. To Novgorod. To Poland. To Hungary. The forest was finished. The stone cities were waiting. Chapter 15, The Hydra's Head, The Invasion of Poland. The year was 1241. The Mongol army, rested and fattened, stood on the borders of Europe. The kings of Europe knew they were coming. Stories of the Tartars had spread like a plague. They heard of men who drank blood, who breathed fire, who were invincible. King Bela IV of Hungary sent frantic letters to the Pope, to the Holy Roman Emperor, to the Duke of Poland. "Unite," he pleaded. "If we do not stand together, we will fall one by one." Subutai sat in his tent, looking at a map of Europe drawn by Venetian spies. He saw the problem immediately. "If we attack Hungary," Subutai told Bedtime Khan, "the Polish armies will come down from the north to help them. We will be fighting two giants at once." "Then we fight them both," Bedtime said, confident in his power. "No," Subutai corrected. "We cut off one head so the other cannot bite." Subutai devised a plan that is still studied in military academies today. He split his army. He took the main force south towards Hungary. But he sent a diversionary force, two Tumans, 20,000 men, led by Orda and Bydar, to the north, into Poland. Their mission was simple: do not conquer Poland. Just kill their army so they cannot help Hungary. The northern detachment moved with terrifying speed. They burned Krakow. They crossed the Oder River. They drew the anger of Duke Henry the Pious of Silesia. Duke Henry gathered a mighty army to stop them. He had Polish knights, infantry, and the most feared warriors in Christendom, the Teutonic Knights. These were warrior monks, clad in heavy plate armor with black crosses on their white cloaks. They were disciplined fanatics. They met at the Battle of Legnica on April 9, 1241. The European knights looked at the Mongols, small men on small horses, wearing leather. They laughed. "They are weak." Henry shouted. "Charge them! For God and glory!" The heavy knights charged. The ground shook. The Mongols fired a volley of arrows and then, they ran away. "They flee," the knights shouted. "Chase them!" The Europeans broke formation. The heavy horses galloped after the retreating Mongols. They became spread out, tired, separated from their infantry. Then, the Mongols did something the Europeans had never seen. They stopped running. They turned. And they lit pots of strange powder. Smoke. Thick, Dark, noxious smoke billowed across the battlefield. It was a smoke screen, fueled by sulfur and animal fat. The knights were blinded. They couldn't see their signals. They couldn't see each other. Out of the smoke, the Mongol heavy lancers emerged. But they didn't hit the knights front on. They hit them from the sides. It was a massacre. The Teutonic knights, blind and confused, were pulled from their horses with hooks and butchered on the ground. Duke Henry tried to rally his men, but he was surrounded. His head was cut off and put on a spear. To count the dead, the Mongols cut an ear off every fallen soldier. They filled 9 large sacks with human ears. Subutai received the message days later in Hungary. The northern head is cut off, the messenger said. Subutai looked at King Bela's lands. Good. Now the king of Hungary is alone. Chapter 16, The Bridge of Stone, the Battle of Mohi. This was the main event. The confrontation between the greatest army of the east and the greatest army of the west. King Bela IV had gathered 100,000 men. It was a sea of iron. He camped on the west bank of the Sejo River. He was smart. He knew the Mongols needed to cross the river to attack him. There was only one bridge. A narrow, stone bridge. Bela placed his best crossbowmen and heavy infantry to guard it. He built a wagon fort, a literal fortress made of chained wagons, behind the bridge. He thought he was unassailable. Subutai watched him from the east bank. He has locked the door. He is looking at the door, Subutai said, his eyes scanning the dark, swirling waters of the river. So we'll enter through the window. The Emperor Frederick II wrote desperate letters. The Pope prayed for the apocalypse, because the apocalypse seemed preferable to the Mongols. Subutai sat in his command tent, just a few days' ride from Vienna. He was 66 years old. His hands were gnarled like old tree roots, but they held the charcoal stick steady. He was drawing a map. The Danube freezes in January, Subutai murmured to himself. We will cross on the ice. Vienna will fall in 3 days. Then, the Alps. Difficult, but not impossible. Then, the Rhine. He looked up. Bedtime Khan was pacing the tent, drinking wine from a golden goblet looted from King Bela. We are the masters of the world, General, Bedtime said, his eyes shining. Nothing stands between us and the Great Sea. My grandfather Genghis dreamed of this, but we're doing it. The dream is heavy, Prince, Subutai said quietly. Do not count the miles before we ride them. Suddenly, the tent flap was thrown open. The wind howled outside, carrying the scent of snow and horse manure. A rider stumbled in. He was covered in gray dust, his face cracked from the cold. He had ridden 4,000 miles in 5 weeks. He collapsed at Bedtime's feet, holding out a scroll sealed with the black wax of the imperial court. The room went silent. The crackling of the fire sounded like gunshots. Bedtime took the scroll. He broke the seal. He read it. The color drained from his face. The goblet dropped from his hand, spilling red wine onto the Persian rug. The Khagan. Bedtime whispered. Ogdi is dead. Subutai closed his eyes. He let out a long, slow breath. He felt the gears of history grinding to a halt. When? Subutai asked. December 11th, the writer gasped. From drink. His heart stopped. Bata looked at the map. He looked at Vienna. He looked at the glory that was just within his reach. We do not stop, Bata said, his voice trembling with denial. We are here. We are at the gates of Europe. If we turn back now, we will never return. I will not go back. Subutai stood up. He walked over to the map that showed the conquest of the world. He picked up the charcoal. He drew a line across the Danube. A hard, black line. The law of Genghis is absolute, Subutai said. His voice was not loud, but it had the weight of a mountain. When the great Khan dies, all princes of the blood must return to the Kurultai to choose the new leader. If you stay, you are a rebel. If you stay, the new Khan, whether it is Gayuk or someone else, will come for you. And he will not come with a cup of wine. He will come with an army. Bata stared at the old man. He wanted to strike him. He wanted to scream. But he knew Subutai was right. So we leave? Batu asked, his voice breaking. We leave it all. The stone cities. The ocean. We leave it, Subutai said. The map is unfinished. The order was given the next morning. The sentries on the walls of Vienna looked out, expecting to see the final assault. Instead, they saw the impossible. The Mongol army, the invincible, unstoppable machine, was turning around. They dismantled their rears. They packed their wagons. They mounted their horses. And they rode east. Europe was saved. Not by knights, not by prayers, not by stone walls. Europe was saved because an old man in Mongolia drank too much wine and his heart stopped. Subutai sat in his carriage as the army withdrew. He watched the spires of the western churches fade into the mist. He knew he would never see them again. The arrow had flown further than any arrow in history. But gravity had finally pulled it down. Epilogue, the River of Eternity. 7 years later. 1248. The banks of the Tul River, Mongolia. The sun was setting, painting the sky in colors of bruised purple and burning gold. The wind rippled through the tall grass, making a sound like whispering spirits. An old man sat on a large, flat rock by the water's edge. He was 72 years old. His body, once a block of iron, was now heavy and tired. One of his eyes was clouded with a cataract. His hands shook with a palsy. To the young warriors riding past, he was just another elder. A relic. They did not look at him twice, they did not know that the old man watching the water was the god of war. They did not know that he had conquered 32 nations. That he had won 65 pitched battles and never lost one. That he had ridden from the Yellow Sea to the Adriatic. Subutai Baghader reached down and picked up a smooth stone from the riverbed. It was cold and wet. Iron, his father had told him a lifetime ago in the dark forest, iron has a memory. Subutai turned the stone in his hand. He remembered the smell of the pine trees. He remembered the first time he saw Genghis Khan's green eyes. He remembered Jeeb's laugh in the snow. He remembered the crunch of the frozen river at Ryazan. He remembered the red water of the Sejo River. He had spent his life breaking things. Breaking armies. Breaking walls. Breaking empires. He had been the hammer. But now, sitting by the river, listening to the eternal flow of the water, he realized that the water always wins. The stone breaks. The iron rusts. The Khan dies. The empire falls. But the river flows. Subutai took a deep breath. The air smelled of home. It smelled of peace. He placed the stone back into the water. I was the felt lining, he whispered to the wind. I kept the wind out. I kept the fire burning. He closed his good eye. He felt a lightness in his chest. The heavy armor was gone. The pain in his legs was gone. He saw a horse waiting for him on the other side of the river. A white horse, saddled and ready. And beside it, a rider with a bow, waving at him. Jeeb. The old wolf smiled. He let out one last, long breath. And then, there was only the silence of the steppe, and the blue, endless sky. The end.